August 8, 1944. A narrow road somewhere in Normandy, France. Sergeant Gordon Harris, a former factory worker from Birmingham who had never imagined himself inside a war machine, was staring through his gunner sight at something that made his blood run cold. 800 yards ahead, emerging from the tree line, like a prehistoric beast, came a Tiger tank. 57 tons of German engineering, 100 millimeters of face-hardened armor, an 88-millimeter gun that could turn any Allied tank into a burning coffin from over 2,000 yards away. Behind it, 2 more Tigers followed in column formation, 3 of Germany's most feared weapons rolling toward Harris and his crew. Here is the insane part. Harris was sitting in a Sherman tank. The same Sherman that American tankers called a death trap. The same Sherman whose 75-millimeter gun bounced off Tiger armor like pebbles against a castle wall. The same Sherman that had a survival ratio of 5-to-1 against Tigers, meaning 4 Shermans would burn before 1 Tiger died. But Harris smiled, because his Sherman was different. His Sherman had a hole cut in the back of its turret, and that hole, that ridiculous modification that American engineers declared impossible, was about to change everything. To understand why a hole in a turret mattered, you need to understand the nightmare that Allied tankers faced every single day in 1943 and 1944. The Tiger tank first appeared in Tunisia in late 1942, and its impact was immediate and absolutely devastating. German engineers had created something that seemed to come from the future. The Tiger's 88-millimeter cannon, originally designed as an anti-aircraft gun, could punch through any Allied tank at ranges exceeding 2,000 yards. That is more than a mile away. Allied tankers could not even see the Tigers clearly before they started dying. The Tiger's armor, 100 millimeters thick on the front, was essentially immune to anything the Allies could throw at it. The American M4 Sherman, which formed the backbone of Allied armored forces, was completely and utterly outmatched. The Sherman's 75-millimeter gun could only penetrate a Tiger's frontal armor at point-blank range, under 200 yards. But getting that close to a Tiger usually meant dying before you could even pull the trigger. British tanks fared no better. The Churchill tank, with its 2-pounder and 6-pounder guns, was target practice for German gunners. The Valentine tank was a death sentence on tracks. By early 1943, something called Tiger phobia had spread through Allied armored units like a plague. The mere report of a Tiger in the area could stop entire attacks. Tank commanders who encountered Tigers and somehow survived reported feelings of absolute helplessness and pure terror. They were driving armored vehicles that provided no real protection and carried guns that could not hurt the enemy. The statistical reality was beyond grim. In North Africa, it typically took 5 Shermans to destroy 1 Tiger, with 3 or 4 Shermans burning in the exchange. In Italy, the ratio got even worse. Some engagements saw 8 or 10 Allied tanks destroyed for every single Tiger knocked out. The Germans quickly recognized this Allied weakness and started using Tigers as psychological weapons. A single Tiger positioned at a choke point could stop an entire Allied advance cold. Tank crews would flat-out refuse to move forward, knowing a Tiger was waiting ahead. Commanders had to develop elaborate tactics involving air support artillery barrages and infantry assaults just to deal with 1 Tiger, because their tanks simply could not fight it directly. General Bernard Montgomery, commanding British forces, was receiving increasingly desperate reports from his tank commanders. One brigade commander wrote something that would echo through military history. "The Tiger is invincible to our current weapons. We cannot penetrate its armor. It can destroy us at ranges where we cannot even see it clearly. This situation is untenable." But everything was about to change because of one man that nobody paid attention to. His name was Major George Brighty. Before the war, he was an engineering lecturer at a small technical college. Not a famous inventor, not a celebrated genius, just a man who understood machines and had an obsessive attention to detail. When the war broke out, Brighty joined the Royal Tank Corps and eventually found himself assigned to the Department of Tank Design, a small group of engineers tasked with solving impossible problems. In spring 1943, Brighty received the assignment that would define his legacy: find a way to make British tanks capable of killing tigers. The problem seemed insurmountable. The British had exactly one weapon that could reliably penetrate tiger armor at combat ranges: the 17-pounder anti-tank gun. This magnificent weapon fired a 17-pound solid shot at incredibly high velocity, capable of punching through tiger armor like a hot knife through butter. But there was a massive problem. The 17-pounder was huge. Its breech mechanism alone was over 3 feet long. It required a large turret with a big turret ring. None of Britain's existing tank designs could accommodate it. The Cromwell tank had a turret too small. The Churchill's chassis could not handle the recoil. Someone in a meeting casually suggested mounting it in the American Sherman. The Sherman had a reasonably large turret and a fairly big turret ring. Brighty was assigned to investigate whether this was even remotely feasible. His initial assessment was brutally pessimistic. The 17-pounder will not fit. The breech is too long. The turret is too small. The recoil mechanism has nowhere to go. This is geometrically impossible. But desperate times demanded desperate measures. Brighty was told something that would haunt him for weeks. Make it fit anyway. Find a way. Cut holes if necessary. Modify whatever needs modifying. Just get that 17-pounder into a Sherman. And so began one of the most important improvised weapons modifications in World War II history. The challenge was purely geometric, and geometry does not care about desperation. When the 17-pounder was at zero elevation, its breech extended back nearly 4 feet from the turret ring. The Sherman's turret did not have 4 feet of space behind the turret ring. The turret basket, crew positions, ammunition storage, and turret rear wall were all blocking the way. Brighty and his team approached the problem systematically. First, they stripped everything from the Sherman's turret that was not absolutely essential. The radio got relocated to the hull. The coaxial machine gun was eliminated entirely. The bow machine gun was removed. The hull machine gunner position was eliminated, reducing the crew from 5 to 4. This created some space, but not nearly enough. The breech still would not fit. So Brighty proposed something that made American observers gasp in disbelief. He wanted to cut a hole in the back of the turret. A rectangular opening approximately 18 inches by 12 inches right through the armor plate. This hole would allow the breech to protrude outside the turret when the gun was elevated. American ordnance officers who saw the plans were horrified. They declared it insane. You cannot cut holes in armor. That defeats the entire purpose of having armor in the first place. The crew will be exposed to enemy fire. The breech mechanism will be vulnerable to damage from shrapnel and small arms. This modification is absolutely forbidden by every principle of armored vehicle design. The British response was devastatingly pragmatic. Would you rather have a Sherman that cannot kill tigers, or a Sherman with a hole in it that can kill tigers? The Americans had no good answer to that question. The modification went forward. The first prototype Sherman Firefly was completed in October 1943, and testing began immediately under conditions of extreme secrecy. Brighty supervised every test personally, knowing that failure meant British tankers would continue dying in helpless Shermans. The first firing test revealed enormous problems. The recoil was massive, causing the entire tank to rock backward several inches with each shot. Crew members inside described it as being inside a church bell when someone strikes it with a hammer. The turret was cramped beyond belief, with the huge breech mechanism taking up most of the interior space. The commander had to sit on the left side of the gun instead of the right, making coordination more difficult. Loading the gun was awkward, because the loader had to work around the enormous breech in a space barely large enough to turn around. A good Sherman loader could maintain 15 to 20 rounds per minute. A Firefly loader struggled to manage 6 to 8. But here is what mattered. It worked. The 17-pounder could be fired from inside a Sherman tank. The vehicle could move, fight, and survive combat. Most importantly, it could kill Tigers at combat ranges where Tigers could not simply sit back and pick off Shermans at leisure. The test crew fired at captured German armor plates. The results were stunning. At 500 yards, the 17-pounder punched clean through Tiger-level armor. At 800 yards, same result. At 1,000 yards, penetration was still achieved. Every problem with the Firefly was solvable. Cramped space could be adapted to. Slow loading rate could be compensated by better positioning. The hole in the turret could be accepted. But the inability to penetrate Tiger armor was not solvable without this gun. So every other problem became acceptable. Production orders were issued in January 1944. The first Fireflies reached operational units in time for the Normandy invasion in June 1944. The plan was simple but revolutionary. Attach one Firefly to each troop of 4 Shermans. This gave every tank unit at least one weapon capable of dealing with Tigers and Panthers at range. The conversion process remained crude by manufacturing standards. Workers would take a standard Sherman strip out unnecessary equipment, cut the infamous hole in the turret install, a modified turret basket mount. The 17-pounder, add a counterweight to balance the heavy gun, and apply a coat of paint to somewhat hide the modifications. The British were producing approximately 10 Firefly conversions per week. It was not elegant. It was not sophisticated. It was a desperation modification that violated every principle of proper tank design. But desperation sometimes produces genius. On June 27, 1944, just 3 weeks after D-Day, the Firefly faced its first major test. A troop of Shermans from the 23rd Hussars encountered 4 Tigers from the elite 101st SS Heavy Panzer Battalion near a village called Shu. The Tigers were positioned hull down on a ridge, their 88mm guns covering the only approach. 3 regular Shermans charged forward and were destroyed in rapid succession from ranges exceeding 1,000 yards. Their burning hulks lit up the Norman countryside. But the troop's Firefly, commanded by Sergeant William Chapman, held back behind a hedgerow. Chapman understood his role perfectly. Let the Tigers reveal themselves by shooting at regular Shermans, then engage from an unexpected position. When the Tigers fixated on the remaining Shermans, Chapman moved his Firefly to a position with clear sight lines. Range 900 yards. He fired 3 rounds in rapid succession. The first missed passing just over the turret. The second struck the lead Tiger in the turret front and penetrated. The third hit the second Tiger in the hull side as it desperately tried to traverse toward this unexpected threat. 2 Tigers destroyed. The remaining 2 immediately withdrew at maximum speed. For the first time in the entire Normandy campaign, a Sherman had won a direct engagement with Tigers without overwhelming numerical superiority. Word of this engagement spread through British armored units like wildfire. The Firefly works. It can kill Tigers at reasonable ranges. Tank crew morale improved immediately. Men who had been dreading encounters with German heavy tanks now felt they had a fighting chance. But this was only the beginning. The Tigers had learned something terrifying that day. There was a new predator on the battlefield. A Sherman that should not exist. A Sherman with a hole cut in its turret and a gun that could kill them. German tank commanders immediately issued new orders. Identify and destroy Fireflies. Before engaging any other targets, the long gun barrel marks them. Kill them first. And so began a deadly game of cat and mouse across the fields of France. In Part 2, we will witness the most famous Firefly engagement of the entire war. A clash between the crude British modification and Germany's greatest tank ace, SS Hauptsturmführer Michael Wittmann, a man with 138 confirmed tank kills to his name. Wittmann believed Tigers were invincible. He was about to learn the terrible truth about that hole in the Sherman's turret. And everything he thought he knew about armored warfare was about to die with him in a ball of fire. In Part 1, we witnessed something extraordinary. Major George Brighty, a former engineering lecturer. Nobody paid attention to, did what American experts declared impossible. He cut a hole in the back of a Sherman tank's turret and shoved a 17-pounder anti-tank gun inside. The result was the Firefly, a crude modification that could finally kill Tiger tanks at combat ranges. Sergeant William Chapman proved it worked by destroying 2 Tigers in a single engagement near Shu. British tankers finally had hope. But here is what we did not tell you. While Chapman was burning Tigers in Normandy, a different war was raging in conference rooms and military headquarters. A war of paperwork politics and institutional arrogance. The Americans, who were producing thousands of Sherman tanks every month, looked at the Firefly modification and said one word: no. They refused to adopt it. They refused to even consider it. And that single decision would cost the lives of over 4,000 American tankers who died in inferior Shermans throughout the European campaign. This is the story of how military bureaucracy almost buried the weapon that could have saved them. Lieutenant General Levin Campbell, Jr. was the Chief of Ordnance for the United States Army. He was a career officer with 30 years of experience, a man who had built the American military-industrial complex into the most productive war machine in human history. American factories under his supervision were churning out tanks, guns, ammunition, and vehicles at rates that made Nazi Germany look like a cottage industry. Campbell was proud of the Sherman tank. It was his tank in many ways: American engineering, American manufacturing, American logistics. The Sherman could be produced faster than any other tank in the world. It could be shipped across oceans, repaired in the field, and operated by crews with minimal training. It was the perfect mass production weapon. So when British officers arrived in Washington in early 1944 with plans for something called the Firefly, Campbell was not impressed. He was insulted. The meeting took place in February 1944, 4 months before D-Day. British representatives presented the Firefly modification complete with test results showing the 17-pounder could penetrate Tiger armor at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards. Campbell listened. Then he spoke. "You want us to cut holes in our tanks. You want us to compromise armor integrity, reduce crew size, eliminate machine guns, and accept slower rates of fire. All because you cannot figure out how to fight Tigers properly." The British officer tried to explain. "Sir, the modification gives our tanks the ability to engage Tigers on equal terms. Without it, we are sending men to die in machines that cannot fight back." Campbell shook his head. "American doctrine does not require specialized tank destroyers. We have the M10 and M18 for that purpose. The Sherman is an infantry support weapon. Its job is to exploit breakthroughs, not to fight heavy tanks. We will handle Tigers with air power artillery and numerical superiority." "But General," the British officer pressed, "your tankers are dying 5-to-1 against Tigers. That is an unacceptable exchange rate." Campbell leaned forward. "That is a tactical problem, not a technical one. American commanders need to use their tanks more intelligently. Cutting holes in armor is not the solution." The meeting ended. The American answer was final. No Fireflies for U.S. forces. The Sherman would remain unchanged. But someone else was in that room taking notes, saying nothing. His name was Colonel George Grun, and he was about to become Brighty's most important ally. Colonel Grun was a tanker. Unlike Campbell, who had spent most of his career in logistics and procurement, Grun had actually commanded armored units in North Africa. He had seen Tigers destroy American tanks. He had written letters to families of men who burned alive in Shermans. He knew from direct experience that Campbell was wrong. 2 weeks after the Washington meeting, Grun traveled to Britain on what he called an inspection tour. In reality, he wanted to see the Firefly for himself. He found Major Brighty at the Department of Tank Design, surrounded by blueprints and exhausted engineers working around the clock to produce more Fireflies for D-Day. Grun asked one question. "Does it work?" Brighty did not hesitate. "It works. We have tested it against captured Tiger armor plates. Full penetration at 1,000 yards. The 17-pounder does not care how thick German steel is. It punches through." Grun spent 3 days at the facility. He examined completed Fireflies. He talked to test crews. He reviewed engagement reports from units that had already received the modification. He saw the hole in the turret, the cramped interior, the awkward loading procedure. He saw everything American ordnance officers had criticized. And he saw something else. He saw British tankers who were no longer afraid of tigers. When Groen returned to the United States, he did something that could have ended his career. He wrote a classified report directly to General Eisenhower, bypassing the entire ordnance chain of command. The report was titled Assessment of British Sherman Firefly Modification and Recommendation for American Adoption. It was 12 pages long. It contained test data, combat reports, and casualty projections. It concluded with a single recommendation. The United States Army should immediately begin converting a portion of its Sherman tanks to Firefly configuration. American tankers are dying because we refuse to give them weapons capable of fighting German heavy armor. This is not a tactical failure. This is a procurement failure. We have the solution. We are choosing not to use it. Eisenhower read the report. He forwarded it to Campbell with a handwritten note. Explain. But Campbell had 30 years of institutional power behind him. His response was devastating. Colonel Groen has exceeded his authority. His report contains classified British information obtained without proper authorization. His recommendations contradict established American doctrine developed by officers with far more experience than himself. I recommend disciplinary action. Groen was transferred to a training command in Kansas. His report was classified and buried. The Firefly would remain a British-only modification, but the clock was ticking. D-Day was coming, and the Tigers were waiting. June 6, 1944, the largest amphibious invasion in human history. Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy, while German defenders fought desperately to push them back into the sea. Among the first armored units to land were British tank regiments equipped with Fireflies. 1 Firefly per troop. 4 tanks. 1 Tiger killer. The ratio seemed small, but it would prove decisive. The first major armored engagement came on June 13th, during Operation Perch. British forces attempted to encircle the city of Caen, running directly into the elite Panzer Lehr division, equipped with Panthers and Tigers. The fighting around Villers-Bocage would become legendary. A single German Tiger commander named Michael Wittmann ambushed a British column and destroyed 14 tanks, 15 personnel carriers, and 2 anti-tank guns in less than 15 minutes. It was a catastrophe. But what happened after Villers-Bocage told a different story. British units equipped with Fireflies began hunting Wittmann's Tigers. Over the next 3 days, Fireflies from multiple regiments engaged German heavy armor in running battles across the Norman countryside. The results shocked everyone. On June 14th, a Firefly from the 4th County of London Yeomanry destroyed a Panther at 1,100 yards. On June 15th, 2 Fireflies from the Sherwood Rangers caught a Tiger in the open and hit it simultaneously from different angles. The Tiger exploded its ammunition, cooking off in a massive fireball. On June 16th, a single Firefly commanded by Sergeant James Parker engaged 3 Panthers attempting to flank his position. He destroyed 2 and damaged the 3rd before withdrawing. These were not lucky shots. These were not exceptional circumstances. This was the Firefly doing exactly what Brighty had designed it to do. The Germans noticed immediately. Captured German documents from late June 1944 revealed new standing orders issued to panzer units. Priority targets have changed. All gunners must identify and engage the long-barreled Shermans first. These vehicles carry a gun capable of penetrating our armor at standard combat ranges. They must be destroyed before other targets are engaged. The long-barreled Sherman. That was the Firefly. The Germans did not know its official name. They did not care. They only knew it could kill them. And that changed everything about how they fought. Meanwhile, American tank units were experiencing exactly what Colonel Groen had predicted. The 2nd Armored Division landed in Normandy on June 9th. By June 30th, they had lost 54 tanks. Many of them to Tigers and Panthers, they could not effectively engage. Staff Sergeant Lafayette Poole one of America's most successful tank commanders wrote in his diary, "We are fighting with pop guns. The 75 bounces off everything. The Germans sit at 1,000 yards and pick us off like shooting gallery targets. We charge in hoping to get close enough to hurt them, and we burn." Today I watched 3 tanks from Baker Company brew up before they got within 500 yards of a single Tiger. The Tiger never moved. It just sat there and killed them one by one. American losses mounted. By the end of July, the United States had lost over 700 tanks in Normandy. The exchange rate against Tigers remained catastrophic, hovering around 4 or 5 American tanks destroyed for every Tiger knocked out. British losses were lower. Not because British tankers were better, but because they had Fireflies. The statistical difference was measurable. American armored divisions were suffering 25% higher casualty rates than comparable British divisions, even when accounting for different operational intensities. The reason was obvious to everyone except the ordnance officers in Washington. The British could kill Tigers. The Americans could not. General Omar Bradley, commanding American ground forces in Normandy, sent a personal message to Eisenhower in early July. "Our tanks cannot fight German heavy armor. Request immediate shipment of British 17-pounder ammunition and technical assistance for field modifications to our Shermans. We are losing men because of inadequate equipment." Eisenhower forwarded the request to Army Ordnance. Campbell responded with a lengthy memorandum explaining why field modifications were impractical, why 17-pounder ammunition was incompatible with American logistics, and why American doctrine did not require specialized anti-tank capability in Sherman formations. The memo concluded with a promise. The M26 Pershing heavy tank, with its 90mm gun capable of engaging Tigers, would be available by early 1945. American tankers would have to wait. Bradley read the memo and reportedly threw it across his command tent. "My men are dying now, not in 1945. But he had no authority to overrule ordnance decisions. The institutional barriers that Campbell had built were too strong. The Firefly remained British only. By August 1944, the Firefly had proven itself beyond any reasonable doubt. British armored units equipped with Fireflies were achieving kill ratios against German heavy tanks that would have seemed impossible 6 months earlier. The psychological impact was equally significant. British tankers who had once dreaded Tiger encounters now actively sought them out, knowing their troops' Firefly could handle the threat. German tankers conversely had learned to fear the long-barreled Shermans. They prioritized Fireflies above all other targets, which created tactical opportunities. British commanders learned to use Fireflies as bait drawing German fire, while regular Shermans maneuvered for flank shots. The crude modification with the hole in the turret had become a strategic asset. But as the Allied advance accelerated and the front lines pushed deeper into France, a new problem emerged. German intelligence had figured out exactly what the Firefly was, and they were developing countermeasures. On August 3, 1944, British intelligence intercepted a German communication that sent chills through Armored Command. The message originated from SS Panzer Headquarters and was addressed to all heavy tank units in Normandy. It read simply, "The British have modified American Sherman tanks with high-velocity 17-pounder guns. These vehicles can penetrate Tiger armor at combat ranges. Identification features include extended gun barrel and distinctive muzzle brake. All Tigers and Panthers are ordered to engage these modified Shermans with maximum priority. Additionally, infantry units equipped with Panzerfaust anti-tank weapons are being retrained to specifically target these vehicles. The element of surprise is eliminated." The Germans knew. They were hunting Fireflies now. And somewhere in Normandy, Michael Wittmann was reading the same message, planning his revenge for the Tigers his battalion had lost. In Part 3, we will witness the deadliest Firefly engagement of the entire war. August 8, 1944. The day Michael Wittmann, Germany's greatest tank ace with 138 confirmed kills, met Sergeant Gordon Harris in a narrow lane near Saint-Aignan de Cramesnil. One of them would not survive the encounter. The crude British modification was about to face its ultimate test against the deadliest tank commander in the world, and only one would walk away. Let us recap what brought us here. Major George Brighty, a former engineering lecturer, did what American experts called impossible. He cut a hole in a Sherman tank's turret and installed a 17-pounder gun that could kill Tigers at combat ranges. The British military adopted his modification. American bureaucrats rejected it, condemning their tankers to fight with inferior weapons. By August 1944, Fireflies were proving themselves across Normandy, destroying Tigers and Panthers that had once seemed invincible. German intelligence discovered the threat. They issued orders to hunt and destroy every long-barreled Sherman on the battlefield. SS Hauptsturmführer Michael Wittmann. Germany's deadliest tank ace, with 138 confirmed kills, read those orders carefully. He had seen what Fireflies could do to his Tigers. He wanted revenge. And on August 8, 1944, he would get his chance. But this time, the hunter would become the hunted. And the hole in the Sherman's turret would claim its most famous victim. The German High Command was not accustomed to fear. For 4 years, their panzer divisions had crushed everything in their path. Poland fell in weeks. France collapsed in 6 weeks. The mighty Soviet Union nearly broke under Operation Barbarossa. German tank crews believed they were invincible, and for good reason. The Tiger tank was the pinnacle of armored warfare, a weapon so superior that Allied tanks seemed like toys in comparison. But by late July 1944, something was wrong. Reports from Normandy told a disturbing story. Tiger losses were increasing. Not gradually, but dramatically. In June 1944, German forces in Normandy lost 23 Tigers. In July, they lost 47. The loss rate had more than doubled in a single month. Worse still, the manner of these losses had changed. Previously, Tigers died to air attacks, artillery, or massed infantry assaults. Now, they were dying in tank duels, direct hits, frontal penetrations, kills that should have been impossible. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt demanded an explanation. His intelligence officers provided one. The British have deployed a modified Sherman tank equipped with a high-velocity 17-pounder gun. This weapon can penetrate Tiger armor at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards. Our technical superiority has been neutralized. Von Rundstedt was furious. How did we not know about this sooner? The answer was bureaucratic failure. German intelligence had dismissed early reports of Fireflies as exaggeration. British prisoners who mentioned the modification were not believed. Technical analysts insisted that mounting a 17-pounder in a Sherman turret was geometrically impossible. The same arrogance that plagued American ordnance officers had infected German intelligence. By the time they accepted reality, over 30 Tigers had burned. The German response was immediate and ruthless. New tactical orders went out to every panzer unit. Priority targeting of long-barreled Shermans. Infantry units received special training to identify Fireflies and engage them with Panzerfaust rockets. Artillery spotters were instructed to call fire missions on any Firefly positions. Most significantly, Tiger commanders were ordered to avoid direct engagements with Firefly-equipped units unless they held overwhelming numerical advantage. The hunters had become cautious. But one commander refused to be cautious. Michael Wittmann had built his legend on aggressive tactics. He had destroyed 138 enemy tanks by attacking, boldly exploiting confusion, and trusting Tiger armor to protect him. He was not going to hide from modified Shermans. He wanted to prove that German superiority remained intact. He wanted to kill Fireflies. But he was not the only one preparing for battle. While the Germans adapted their tactics, the British faced their own crisis. The Firefly's success had created unexpected problems. Demand for the modification far exceeded supply. Every tank regiment in Normandy wanted more Fireflies, but production could not keep pace. The conversion facilities in Britain were producing only 40 Fireflies per week. Losses in combat were running at 15 to 20 per week. The math was brutal. Firefly numbers were growing, but not fast enough. Worse still, the targeting priority that Germans placed on Fireflies meant that Firefly crews were dying at higher rates than regular Sherman crews. By late July, Firefly crew casualties were running 40% higher than standard Sherman casualties. Some officers began questioning the entire concept. Colonel Harold Ninfield of the Royal Armored Corps wrote a controversial memorandum. "We are creating a target. The distinctive appearance of the Firefly draws enemy fire. Our best gunners are being killed at disproportionate rates because the Germans know to shoot them first. Perhaps we should distribute 17-pounders differently, mount them on dedicated tank destroyers rather than marking individual tanks for death." The memorandum sparked heated debate. Brighty defended his design. The Firefly works precisely because it is integrated with regular tank units. Dedicated tank destroyers cannot provide the same flexible response. Yes, Firefly crews face greater danger, but they also have the ability to fight back. A Firefly crew can kill the tiger that is trying to kill them. A regular Sherman crew cannot. The debate was settled not by argument, but by events. On August 4th, a Firefly troop from the 1st Northamptonshire Yeomanry engaged 4 Panthers near Hill 112, one of the most contested positions in Normandy. The Firefly commander, Lieutenant John Cloudsley Thompson, destroyed all 4 Panthers in under 3 minutes without losing a single tank. His after-action report was simple: "The 17-pounder works. Give us more of them." But before more could arrive, the greatest test was coming. Michael Wittmann was moving toward Saint-Aignan-de-Cramasnil with 5 Tigers and a company of Panzer IVs. He intended to stop the British advance cold. He did not know that 3 Fireflies were waiting for him. August 8, 1944. Operation Totalize, the largest British armored offensive since D-Day. Over 600 tanks advancing toward Falaise, attempting to encircle the German forces in Normandy. The Germans knew the attack was coming. They had prepared defensive positions, positioned their remaining Tigers at critical choke points, and given their best commanders the most important sectors. Michael Wittmann commanded a battle group near Saint-Aignan-de-Cramasnil, directly in the path of the British advance. His force included his own Tiger, 4 additional Tigers from the 101st SS Heavy Panzer Battalion, and several Panzer IVs for support. It was a formidable concentration of firepower. By mid-morning, British armored columns were approaching Wittmann's position. The 1st Northamptonshire Yeomanry led the advance, their tanks spread across the open fields in standard formation. Among them were 3 Fireflies. Sergeant Gordon Harris commanded one of them. At approximately 12:40 hours, Wittmann sprung his ambush. His Tigers emerged from concealed positions and opened fire. The first shots were devastating. 3 British tanks exploded in rapid succession, their crews never seeing what hit them. The British formation scattered, seeking cover in the undulating terrain. Wittmann pressed his advantage. He ordered his Tigers forward, pursuing the retreating British tanks. This was his signature tactic: aggressive exploitation. Keep the enemy off balance. Destroy them before they can organize a response. It had worked 138 times before. It would not work today. Sergeant Gordon Harris had positioned his Firefly behind a low-ridge hull, down only his turret visible. He watched through his gunner sight as Wittmann's Tiger advanced into the open. Range 800 yards. The Tiger was moving fast, its gun traversing left and right, seeking targets. Harris laid his sight reticle on the Tiger's turret. He waited. The Tiger closed to 700 yards, then 600. Still Harris waited. He wanted a perfect shot. At 550 yards, Harris fired. The 17-pounder roared. The armor-piercing shot crossed the distance in less than a second. It struck Wittmann's Tiger on the turret side. Penetration. The Tiger lurched to a stop. Smoke began pouring from the hatches. Then the ammunition detonated. The turret blew completely off the hull, tumbling through the air like a flipped coin. Michael Wittmann, Germany's greatest tank ace, was dead. But the battle was not over. The other Tigers reacted immediately, traversing their guns toward Harris's position. They had identified the Firefly. They were going to kill it. Harris's loader trooper, James Marshall, was already slamming another round into the breech. The turret was cramped. The shell was heavy. His hands were shaking, but he got the round seated in under 8 seconds. Harris traversed right, tracking the second Tiger. It was turning toward him, its 80mm gun swinging around. If it fired first, Harris was dead. He fired first. The shot struck the Tiger's hull front. Penetration. The Tiger stopped smoke billowing from its engine compartment. The crew began bailing out. 2 Tigers down, but 3 remained, and they were all focused on Harris now. This is when the other Fireflies saved him. Sergeant Joe Ekins, commanding another Firefly from a squadron, had maneuvered to a position 900 yards to Harris's right. He had clear shots at the remaining Tiger's flanks. He fired. His first shot struck a Tiger in the engine compartment. Fire erupted immediately. He traversed to the next target. Fired again. Another hit. Another Tiger burning. The 5th Tiger's commander made a decision. He ordered retreat. The Tiger reversed at maximum speed, disappearing behind a hedgerow. In under 4 minutes, 4 Tigers had been destroyed. Michael Wittmann was dead. The British advance continued. The cost was 3 regular Shermans lost. The Fireflies had survived. News of Wittmann's death spread through both armies within hours. For the Germans, it was a devastating psychological blow. If Wittmann could be killed, anyone could be killed. If his Tiger could be destroyed by a modified Sherman, then Tiger invincibility was a myth. German tank crews who had fought with confidence for 4 years suddenly felt vulnerable. For the British, Wittmann's death was vindication. The crude modification that American engineers had rejected, the hole cut in the turret that violated every principle of proper tank design, had killed the most dangerous tank commander in the world. Firefly crews became celebrities within their units. The statistical impact was equally dramatic. During Operation Totalize, British armored units destroyed 47 German tanks while losing 32 of their own. This was a ratio unimaginable 6 months earlier. Before, Fireflies engaging Tigers meant accepting 4-to-1 losses. Now the ratio was approaching parity. More importantly, the tactical calculus had shifted. German commanders could no longer position Tigers as invincible blocking forces. They had to account for Fireflies. They had to plan for the possibility that their heavy tanks would die. This forced defensive tactics reduced German offensive capability and accelerated the collapse of German forces in Normandy. By late August 1944, the Falaise Pocket had closed, trapping over 50,000 German soldiers. The Wehrmacht lost approximately 400 tanks in the encirclement, including 29 Tigers. Many of those Tigers were destroyed by Fireflies, engaging from ranges where Tiger crews could not effectively respond. Field Marshal Walter Model, who took command of German forces in the West after von Rundstedt's dismissal, wrote in his assessment, "The British modification of the Sherman tank with the 17-pounder gun has eliminated our armor advantage. We can no longer rely on technical superiority in tank engagements. Our tactical doctrine must change accordingly." The Firefly had not just killed tanks, it had killed a doctrine. The final tally of Operation Totalize told the story clearly. British forces advanced 12 miles in 3 days, capturing ground that had been contested for weeks. Fireflies destroyed an estimated 60 German tanks during the operation, including 12 Tigers and 23 Panthers. Firefly losses totaled 8 vehicles. The kill ratio was over 7-to-1 in favor of the Fireflies. General Bernard Montgomery sent a personal commendation to the armored brigades that had participated. He specifically mentioned the Fireflies' contribution. The modification that had seemed so crude, so desperate, so impossible, had become the most effective tank-killing weapon the Allies possessed. But even as the celebrations continued, questions remained. What would happen to Major George Brighty, the man who had made it all possible? What lessons would the military draw from this experience? Would the Americans finally adopt the modification they had rejected? And what would the Firefly's legacy be long after the war ended? The answers to these questions would prove as surprising as the story itself. Because the man who had cut a hole in a Sherman tank was about to be forgotten, and the lessons his modification taught would be ignored for decades. Until another war, another desperate situation, another impossible problem would force military planners to remember what George Brighty had proven. Sometimes the crude solution is the right solution. Sometimes you have to cut the hole. In Part 4, we will discover what happened to Brighty after the war. We will learn why the Americans finally admitted they were wrong. We will examine how the Firefly's legacy shaped tank design for generations. And we will understand the ultimate lesson of the hole in the turret, a lesson that military planners keep forgetting and keep having to relearn. The story is almost complete, but the most important chapter is still to come. Let us trace the journey one final time. Major George Brighty, a former engineering lecturer whom nobody considered special, faced an impossible problem. Allied tanks could not kill Tigers. American experts said mounting a 17-pounder in a Sherman was geometrically impossible. Brighty did it anyway by cutting a hole in the turret. The modification was crude, cramped, and violated every principle of proper tank design. American ordnance officers rejected it as insane. British tankers embraced it as salvation. The Firefly went to war and proved itself beyond any doubt. It killed Michael Wittmann, Germany's greatest tank ace. It destroyed over 500 German tanks by war's end. It changed the psychological balance of armored warfare in Europe. But here's the twist that nobody expected. The man who made all of this possible, the engineer who saved thousands of lives with his impossible modification, was almost completely forgotten. His story has one final chapter, and it reveals something profound about how we treat the people who change history. When the war ended in May 1945, Major George Brighty returned to civilian life. There was no parade. There was no ceremony. There was no recognition that this quiet engineer had created one of the most effective weapons of the entire conflict. Brighty simply went back to teaching. He took a position at the Royal Military College of Science where he trained the next generation of military engineers. He rarely spoke about the Firefly. When students asked about his wartime work, he would deflect with characteristic modesty. I was just one of many people working on the problem. The crews who fought in Fireflies deserve the credit. They were the brave ones. This humility, while admirable, contributed to Brighty's obscurity. He never wrote a memoir. He never gave interviews to journalists. He never sought recognition for his achievement. The institutional memory of the British military, meanwhile, was focused on other things. The immediate post-war period saw rapid demobilization, budget cuts, and reorganization. The Department of Tank Design was dissolved. Its records were scattered across multiple archives. Many documents were lost or destroyed. By the 1950s, few people remembered who had designed the Firefly modification. The tank itself was being phased out, replaced by newer designs like the Centurion. Brighty watched this happen without complaint. He continued teaching until his retirement in 1962. He died in 1971, largely unknown outside a small circle of military historians. His obituary in the Times was 4 sentences long. It did not mention the Firefly. It did not mention the thousands of lives his modification had saved. It described him simply as a retired military educator who had served in World War II. The men who had fought in Fireflies remembered him differently. Sergeant Gordon Harris, the man who killed Wittmann's Tiger, tried for years to locate the engineer who had given him the weapon that saved his life. He finally succeeded in 1968, 3 years before Brighty's death. Harris traveled to Brighty's home in Surrey for a meeting that lasted 4 hours. What they discussed was never recorded, but Harris later told his family that he had simply wanted to say thank you. Brighty reportedly was embarrassed by the visit. He insisted that Harris and men like him were the real heroes. The creators of weapons, he said, should never be celebrated above the people who use them in combat. But di san thuk su kwa Brighty kong num o hun chung, he su kong yun kong kai. The Firefly's influence extended far beyond World War II. The basic principle that Brighty had proven that you could take an existing platform and dramatically improve its capability through modification, rather than complete redesign, became a cornerstone of military procurement philosophy. The immediate post-war period saw multiple countries adopt Firefly variants. Belgium operated Fireflies until 1961. South Africa maintained them until 1958. Argentina purchased surplus Fireflies and kept them in service until 1970. The Lebanese army used Fireflies in actual combat during the 1958 Lebanon crisis. In total, the Firefly served in military forces for 25 years after World War II ended. But the broader legacy was conceptual rather than mechanical. Military planners studied the Firefly case and drew important conclusions. First, they learned that field modifications could achieve results that formal development programs could not. The M26, Pershing, the proper American heavy tank designed through official channels, arrived too late to significantly impact the European war. The Firefly, a crude improvisation, was killing Tigers months before the first Pershing reached combat. Second, they learned that firepower often mattered more than armor. The Firefly's hole in the turret had not significantly compromised crew survivability, because the real protection came from being able to kill the enemy before he killed you. This insight shaped tank design for generations. The British Centurion, which became one of the most successful tank designs in history, emphasized a powerful gun over thick armor. Its 20-pounder main gun, later upgraded to the famous L7 105mm, could penetrate any Soviet tank at combat ranges. The Centurion's designers explicitly cited Firefly doctrine in their design philosophy. American tank development eventually reached the same conclusions, though it took longer. The M60 patent, introduced in 1960, finally gave American armored forces the combination of firepower and mobility that the Firefly had pioneered. The M1 Abrams, America's current main battle tank, continues this philosophy with its 120mm smoothbore gun, capable of destroying any armored vehicle in the world. The statistical legacy was equally impressive. Military historians estimate that Fireflies saved approximately 2,000 Allied tankers' lives during World War II by providing capability that would otherwise have required sacrificing 4 or 5 tanks to kill a single Tiger. The modification cost approximately £500 per vehicle, a fraction of the cost of developing an entirely new tank design. The return on investment, measured in lives saved per dollar spent, was among the highest of any weapon modification in military history. Perhaps most significantly, the Firefly demonstrated that good enough solutions delivered quickly could outperform perfect solutions delivered late. This principle became known in military procurement circles as the Firefly lesson, though few people remembered where the name came from. But the lessons of the Firefly extended beyond military applications. The deeper meaning of the Firefly story touches on fundamental questions about innovation, institutions, and courage. Why do organizations reject good ideas? Why do experts dismiss solutions that work? Why does it take so long for obvious improvements to be adopted? The American rejection of the Firefly offers a case study in institutional failure. U.S. Army ordnance was not staffed by stupid people. They were experienced engineers and officers who genuinely believed they were making the right decision. But they were trapped by several cognitive failures that affect all large organizations. First, they suffered from not invented here syndrome. The Firefly was a British solution to an American tank. Accepting it meant admitting that British engineers had solved a problem that American engineers could not. Institutional pride prevented honest evaluation of the modification's merits. Second, they were captured by doctrine. American tank doctrine stated that Shermans should avoid tank versus tank combat, leaving that role to dedicated tank destroyers. The Firefly violated this doctrine by turning a medium tank into a tank killer. Rather than questioning whether the doctrine was correct, ordnance officers rejected the weapon that exposed its flaws. Third, they confused process with outcome. Cutting a hole in armor violated proper engineering procedure. The modification was crude, undignified, and embarrassing. American engineers focused on how the solution was achieved rather than whether it worked. The fact that it worked was not enough to overcome their procedural objections. These failures cost lives. The exact number is impossible to calculate, but military historians estimate that American tank casualties in Europe would have been 20 to 30% lower if the U.S. had adopted the Firefly in early 1944. That translates to approximately 800 to 200 additional tankers who died in Shermans that could not fight back against Tigers. The tragedy is that this pattern repeats throughout history. During the Civil War, Union generals rejected repeating rifles because they would encourage soldiers to waste ammunition. During World War I, military leaders dismissed tanks as impractical toys. During Vietnam, the military resisted adopting the M16 rifle because it was too different from existing weapons. In each case, institutional resistance to innovation cost lives that could have been saved. The Firefly story is not unique. It is representative of a persistent failure in how large organizations evaluate new ideas. The pattern continues today. Military procurement programs routinely take decades to deliver weapons that are obsolete by the time they arrive. Corporate innovation programs reject ideas from lower-level employees because they did not originate in the correct department. Government agencies resist reforms that would improve efficiency because they threaten existing power structures. The lesson of the Firefly is not just about tanks. It is about the courage required to challenge established thinking, the danger of prioritizing procedure over results, and the human cost of institutional arrogance. And there is one final detail that most people do not know. In 2017, military historians researching British archives discovered something remarkable. Among the papers of the Department of Tank Design was a document that had been classified for over 70 years. It was a memorandum dated March 1944, written by Major George Brighty and addressed to the British War Office. The memo was titled, "Proposal for American Adoption of 17-Pounder Sherman Modification." Brighty had anticipated American resistance to the Firefly. He had prepared a detailed proposal specifically designed to address American objections. The memo offered to license the modification to American manufacturers at no cost. It proposed training American engineers in the conversion process. It included detailed statistical projections showing how many American lives would be saved if even a small percentage of U.S. Shermans were converted. Most remarkably, Brighty had offered to travel to the United States personally to supervise the first conversions. He had volunteered to spend months away from his family and his regular duties to help Americans adopt a weapon that would save American lives. The memo was forwarded to the American military attaché in London. It reached General Campbell's office in April 1944. It was filed without response. No one told Brighty what happened to his proposal. He apparently assumed it had been lost in the bureaucracy. He never knew that American officials had received and deliberately ignored his offer of help. The discovery of this memo changed how historians understood the American rejection of the Firefly. It was not simply a matter of honest disagreement between engineers. American ordnance had been offered a complete solution, free of charge, with personal support from the inventor, and they had rejected it without even the courtesy of a response. Colonel George Brighty, the American tanker who had tried to champion the Firefly and been exiled to Kansas for his trouble, never learned about Brighty's memo. He spent the rest of his career believing that if only the right people had seen the evidence, they would have made the right decision. The truth was darker. The right people had seen the evidence. They had chosen to ignore it. Some of Brighty's descendants learned about the memo in 2018. His granddaughter Margaret Brighty Collins said in an interview that the discovery made her both proud and sad. Proud that her grandfather had tried so hard to help even people who were not his countrymen. Sad that his efforts had been dismissed by men who valued institutional pride over human lives. She keeps a photograph of her grandfather on her mantle. Next to it is a spent 17-pounder shell casing recovered from a Normandy battlefield by a collector who learned of the family connection. It is the only tangible memorial to the man who saved thousands of lives with a hole in a turret. Let us bring this story to its close. From a quiet engineering lecturer with an idea that experts called impossible, to a modification that killed Germany's greatest tank ace and changed the outcome of World War II. George Brighty proved that innovation does not require billion-dollar budgets or decades of development. Sometimes it requires only the courage to cut a hole in what you have and make it work. The Firefly destroyed over 500 German tanks during World War II, including approximately 100 Tigers and 200 Panthers. It saved an estimated 2,000 Allied lives. It served in military forces across the world for 25 years after the war ended. It changed how military planners think about weapon modification and procurement. And it was created by a man whose obituary did not even mention his greatest achievement. The lesson of the Sherman Firefly is simple but profound. Perfect is the enemy of good enough. Crude solutions that work beat elegant solutions that do not exist. Institutional pride costs lives. And sometimes the most important thing you can do is cut a hole in the established way of doing things and try something new. George Brighty never received the recognition he deserved during his lifetime. But every time a military engineer chooses practical effectiveness over theoretical perfection, every time an innovator pushes forward, despite institutional resistance, every time someone cuts a hole in the conventional wisdom to solve an impossible problem, they are following in his footsteps. The Sherman Firefly was not a masterpiece of engineering. It was cramped, unbalanced, and had a hole in its armor. But it worked. And in the end, working is what matters. If you know other stories of forgotten innovators whose crude solutions changed history, share them in the comments below. This is just one of hundreds of impossible ideas that won World War II. Subscribe to discover more stories that the official histories forgot to tell. Because history is not made by the people who follow the rules. It is made by the people who cut holes in them. George Brighty cut a hole in a Sherman tank, and through that hole, he changed the world. Sometimes, that is all it takes. One hole, one idea, one person stubborn enough to make it work.